it's nice to meet you, Rob.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
It sounds like you and I kind of do something very similar but mine's a podcast and yours is kind of like an adventure journey.
Yeah,
Um, and we both like to make these very conversational.
yes.
I always hate when people are like, "Oh, during this interview," and I don't mean I hate it, but I'm like, "It's not an interview; it's a conversation. Like,
So I
let's
get the
just talk."
same exact thing, yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, "Let's just talk." So I just said when we hopped on was sorry it took so long to get back to me. And of course, I said no worries at all. What I'm curious about is how you actually kind of filter some of your um, incoming inquiries. But I'll also, just for context for anyone watching this, just say that I had seen what you were doing last year. So this is early 2021. I don't know when I'll release this
Mhm.
because I released it in seasons, and with work, it's just hard to be able to edit every week and release
Yeah,
every week. And I don't want to do something that I'm not going to, follow through with. So I've just done it in seasons. This is going to be my second one. So anyway, I saw what you were doing mid 2020 and just DM'd you asking you to be on my podcast. And I think I was just kind of like, and if you want to talk to me for your project, cool. And then I put out an IG story just saying like, hey, if you know anyone who's, doing pretty much really cool shit, let me know. And Jen, I'm assuming it's a friend, she's a friend of yours, had DM'd me like, I have a friend who's doing really cool things. And she like tagged you or whatever. And I was like, actually, I messaged him like last year. And she was like, oh, I'll push this through. No worries. So here we are.
nice. Yeah,
Yeah. They,
she was an early friend. She was, like, super early on in the project.
oh, okay. So you guys met through doing this, not th- any other way.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. Cool. So how did you connect with her?
I don't know, because it was probably I lived in Philadelphia in the Northern Liberties neighborhood when I started this project. Um, I would have to look back at our let me see real quick. So she was the 713th person. We met on February 6th of 2017. And
So are
she
you just
found
looking back at your DMs?
I'll show you. Um, I write everyone's story in my iPhone notes before I put it into Instagram. So if you look at my iPhone notes, it's just like thousands of notes from people's stories before I put it into Instagram. Because of the formatting, like when you do the little dots and stuff, it's harder to do in Instagram. So, but it's also a good record because I can just search anyone's name from the project and be like, oh, boom, I met them on this date. This is where we met. This is what we talked about.
Interesting. Okay, that's really cool. Very organized.
Yes. Yeah.
So before I actually ask you more about all of this, why don't you just give us a brief rundown on what you're doing?
Yeah. So I am on a mission to spend 1 hour one on one with 10,000 different people. I started my project back in November of 2015. At the time, I was working at a tech startup. I had graduated from Penn State in 2013. I studied finance there. Yeah, and then I went into consulting for Deloitte. So I was in super corporate button down environment, um, and it just wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't feel fulfilled there, and I had minored in entrepreneurship, and so I wanted to do something that I thought was going to fulfill me, but also it was like me creating my own path for myself. So when I was at Penn State, I was really involved in clubs and activities. I did the Penn State Dance Marathon, if you're familiar with it. It could raise money
Hmm.
for kids with cancer. I was in a fraternity. I did Habitat for Humanity trips over spring breaks. I was a tour guide and I was a homecoming captain. And so I had my hand in a lot of different things. And when I left school, I missed that feeling of being able to walk down the street and run into people that I knew, because it happened to me so often at school. Like if I was on my way to class or if I was out at the bars, I would always see someone other than the person that I was already with. And I
Hmm.
was the type of person to just go up and be like, "Hey, what's up? How's your day? Like, what are you up to this weekend?" Um, so yeah, I started the project kind of as a result of that, having a well-paying consulting job, not feeling fulfilled, wanting to get back to where I was at Penn State. So in November 2015, I started meeting people, and the idea was I would always document it on Instagram. say that's why the project is called Robs10kFriends. It's like these are the 10K people that I met through my project eventually. And uh, yeah, 8 months after I started it, the company that I worked for was bought out. So I was laid off. And so in July of 2016, I jumped into this full time. And we can talk all about that journey, but I've been doing this full time since then. It's the only thing that I've done since July of 2016. And I've now met over 4,000 people, like 4,043 people or something like that.
That's so cool. I love
Yeah.
just talking to people. Like I definitely probably talk too much in my life. Not in a gossipy way, just in a like anyone in my
Enjoy
family or
conversation. Yeah.
yeah, everyone's just like, oh, like talking to that kind of thing. So I'm like, this is so cool for you. Okay, I have so many thoughts now. So number one, you probably again get so many inquiries. So just to refresh your memory,
Yeah.
I think I said this in my DM, maybe I didn't, but I also went to Penn State. So when somehow your Instagram popped up for me, I was like, oh cool. I honestly thought that I recognized your face just
Hmm.
from seeing you on campus. I think I graduated in 2015. When did you graduate?
Oh, yeah. I was 2013.
Okay. So yeah, it definitely it's not necessarily my imagination, but
Oh,
could be.
yeah. We definitely crossed paths before.
And I love Penn State because things like that, whether it's Thon or Lambs or whatever else it is, just kind of makes you feel connected. Or even if you just like, I went to Penn State, you're like, so did I. Cool.
Oh, for sure. Automatic connection. And I
Yeah.
like playing that game of did you know this person? Because a lot of times you do,
Hmm.
oddly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to dive into because with my podcast, I'm very focused on um, just like how can we make people happier and for me, this podcast is kind of like therapy for me in that like I'm always striving to figure out what I can change to make myself happier and what can I change just internally, externally, or what am I doing right? And hearing about other people's stories just makes me motivated and inspired. So if I can share that with other people, I think that my guess is that they could probably relate and maybe they can be inspired too. And so one of the things that pops up as I think about which direction to go with this episode. I'm like, Deloitte is a great company. You know, you probably, like you said, you kind of gave up a salary. I'm curious just about what your feelings were day to day, like that led you to a place where you're like, this isn't right for me. And
Mm.
then what led you to the startup, and then how you felt when you were um, let go or laid off. So have at it wherever you prefer.
Yeah. So Deloitte was my reach company, I think. When I was looking at jobs, having studied finance, I thought, okay, either investment banking or consulting. I want to go into one of the two most prestigious things you can do with a finance degree. And so I was lucky to get my job at Deloitte. I did not do well in interviews, but I I was really involved on campus. I had really good grades at school, and so fortunately they took a chance on me. And I was there for a year and 3 months. So I was based out of the Philly office. More specifically, I was doing strategy and operations consulting for them. Um, I was based out of the Philly office. I worked in Jersey City for 2 months, Philly for a few months here and there. I was in Kentucky for 4 months, and I was in New York City for 3 months. And pretty early on, within the first month or two of being at Deloitte, I knew that it wasn't for me. But I think I told myself that this is your job. You're not supposed to be happy. This is how you get paid. You can't have like
Mm,
happiness with your job. And I think a lot of people think that they're supposed to just trade their time for money, and then they use that money to do things that make them happy. And for some people, that is the right formula. It just wasn't for me. Um, so yeah, pretty early on at Deloitte, I realized that it wasn't going to be something that I wanted to do long term. I didn't like the idea of not having lunch until my manager had lunch, or not leaving the office until my manager left the office. There was a lot of unspoken politics, I think, because then those people were the people who determined your rating at the end of that project, and your rating determined your bonus and your raise. And if you're not fulfilled, then you're working there for the money, then those are the things that matter most to you. And so that was just kind of the situation for me. And I've never really had luck in the corporate world. I did an internship going into my junior year where they ran out of work for me halfway through the year. It was me and another intern, but we still had to go in for the second half of the summer. And I just had to watch Netflix and YouTube videos and stuff just to pass the time. And it sounds good in theory, but it is awful. Trying to fill 9 hours a day of time with nothing is extremely difficult. And then the next summer, I worked at Dick's Sporting Goods at their headquarters, and I got there at the quarter close, so they were tying all the books for the quarter in accounting, and my manager just didn't pay attention to me for the first 2 weeks, and so again, I was just sitting there with nothing to do. And when I was at Deloitte, I had a period where I had rolled off of a project, and the firm wasn't selling much new work at the time, so I wasn't doing anything in that time, and I always had this entrepreneurial drive as well, so I felt like I wanted to go 100 miles an hour. And at Deloitte, I was only going like 40 miles an hour. And part of that too comes from the fact that I was on the exec board of clubs at Penn State, and I felt like I had an impact on the campus there. And then I went into this role in this big company where the best I could do was take notes on calls or format PowerPoint slides the right shade of blue or format Excel sheets. And I understand that you have to work your way up the ladder, but if I was going to work my way up a ladder, I wanted to do it for myself and not for another big company. So
Hmm.
when I was at Deloitte, I was in a good program too. You do 2 years as an analyst, one as a consultant, and then you go get your MBA full time for 2 years. So my colleagues who stayed have their MBA from Columbia, University of Chicago, Wharton, UVA, and I thought at the very least that I would do that because it was going to be a free MBA. But I never sought to leave Deloitte, but I had the mindset if the right opportunity came up, then I would hop on it.
Hmm.
And when I was working in Kentucky, one of the senior consultants that I was working with, he would fly up from the Houston office and he said, "My friend Ben works for startups. You should get in touch with him. He's the director of sales at this startup in Philly." So I talked to Ben and I told Ben, like, "Hey, I'm not interested in joining your company. I just want to learn about your path of going." He went from private equity into the startup world because I saw myself doing something similar at some point. And the more I heard about their startup, the more I liked it. So then I
Mm.
ended up interviewing there, and then they had 7 million in funding at the time. And I interviewed, enjoyed it, and I was just waiting for them to get back to me, but they kept kind of pushing me off. And then I was working in New York City for Deloitte, and my girlfriend at the time was there, so I was in no rush to get out of that situation.
Hmm.
But I checked TechCrunch one day, and it said RJ Metrics, that company that I had interviewed at, raises Series B of $16.5 million. So I emailed them and said, "Hey, congrats on the additional funding." And they said, "Hey, it's time for you to join us." So that's how I left Deloitte to go to the tech startup. And I really enjoyed working there. Everyone was in their 20s, super young team. Like I would be going out to concerts with my colleagues and we would be going out to bars together and stuff. I lived with a couple of them. That was a fun time. And then the company just kind of it ramped up really quickly and then it plateaued. It was in the data analytics market. There were a lot of other competitors in that market and our product just wasn't the best. And so after starting this in November of 2015, I kind of saw that plateau. So that company laid off 20% of the company in February of 2016. So my team went from 19 people to 5, which is what it was at when I started. So all that progress that I had made of moving up within the company was just kind of taken out from under me. And so I went back to prospecting companies every day, which for me wasn't something that I wanted to do. And I had only met like 30 people at the time for my project, but I knew that it was something that I felt prepared to go into full time. And
Wait,
then,
prospecting companies meaning like for interviews and new jobs, or
oh, no, no, prospecting companies to sell them our software. I was working in sales for this tech startup.
oh, so you weren't, so you were not laid off at that point. You were part of the five.
Oh, yeah, yeah, sorry. I was part of the
Okay,
5 that they kept. And then whatever it was, 6 months later, I was laid off because then the company sold to a bigger company. Yeah,
got it,
so
got it, got it.
there was this period of where they laid off 20% of the company. I was one of the people that they kept. And by this point, I had one foot out the door already into my project. And I became more liberal with my meetings. I was meeting people on my lunch hour. I would leave the office at 5 p.m. every day and meet someone after work. And yeah, then it was just kind of a seamless transition. By the time that I was laid off, I had already met over 100 people for my project. And I had 1 month of severance pay, and so I thought to myself, okay, well, I'll do this 2 to 3 months full time, and if it goes well, I'll continue doing it. And if not, then I'll just jump back into a consulting job with a company like Deloitte or KPMG or whatever. And yeah, that is, at that time, you talked about how did I feel at that layoff. It felt very natural to me. I think people hear that point in my story and they're like, oh, he was laid off from his job and I'm so sorry that that happened to you and so courageous to jump into this full time. But I equate it more to like being at Chipotle and picking which option you want. It just didn't feel like a big deal to me. I just felt like, oh, well, I'll try that for a little bit and we'll see what that's like.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I did my project full time, I increasingly became more and more committed to it. And then at this point, it's like I will do everything to make sure that this is my path going forward and that I don't have to go back into that working world unless I choose to do so on my own.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. That's really cool. And just on the one of your last points about, the Chipotle example and being laid off, I think that's really good for someone like me to hear. Like, I'm very career focused, and I care so much about my work and doing well for the company I work for. But also, I have this fear of losing a job, no matter how hard I work. Just something that's in me, and which shouldn't be at all because I work so freaking hard and and efficiently too, not just like it's like I work smart, hard, whatever. Um, so hearing that, it's like it's cool because I think, me being biased with where I kind of stand with all of that, is that we need to get rid of the stigma around, like, God forbid I did lose my job, God forbid you did lose your job. It's okay, like, look at you and how something awesome has come of it. And even if it's my having that fear, it's like I know that that's the fact, and that regardless of whatever happens, for a reason, it's going to be okay. But for some reason, I still like have that in my head. So thanks for sharing that. I think that's really cool, and hopefully it helps other people too.
Of course. Yeah, I always say rock bottom has a big pillow on top of it. I think what we perceive it to be is a lot worse than what it actually is, especially if you have a really good support system.
Hell yeah, you're right. And then going back to you leaving Deloitte, I'm judging based off of the way you talk about all of this, you didn't have much of a problem with it, but um like, I know in the past when I've left a job, I have been so scared. And I think I'm 27, and before this I mean, the last time I left a job was probably like 24 or something. I forget, but so my point being that maybe I've grown since then. But I remember being so scared to even just have that conversation, and I didn't want to disappoint the people who gave me that opportunity and everything. So what was that experience like for you with actually telling Deloitte, like, hey, I'm moving on now?
It was interesting because I so you're rolling on and off of projects so frequently. So my team, like the people that I told, hey, I'm leaving the firm, I had only known them for 3 months, even though I was at the firm for a year and 3 months, because they were just my most recent project in New York City. And the manager that I had in that project was not my favorite manager. She was an extreme micromanager. And for example, there was one time that she kept the entire team. At this point, I knew I was going to leave the firm. So I left early that day, which was at 9 p.m. at night. She kept the team in the office till 3 a.m. And I just, I knew that those weren't regular working conditions. Like, it wasn't that our team wasn't effective, it was that she was not effective in her planning and her managing of the project. And so I didn't really feel bad about leaving that type of environment to go to something that I felt was better for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were, I think leaving my colleagues was a thing because the class that I started with, I really enjoyed those people and I'm still tight with them. One of them got married a couple summers ago, and I was at the point driving across the country for my project, and I stopped in Chicago and went to his wedding, and he's still a good friend of mine. But yeah, saying goodbye to them was one thing, and then I don't know if there was, even because of the structure of it, I guess over a year and 3 months I wasn't super tight with any of the leadership, or I didn't feel as though anyone was like truly invested in growing me as a member of the firm. So for me, it felt very simple. I didn't feel bad, but at the same time, I will never burn a bridge. Like I would happily go back and chat with those people. I've met up with some of the partners after the fact. One of them is a Penn State grad, so I would drop by his tailgates at Penn State. Um, but yeah, and it's funny because I speak kind of negatively about the experience, which I think comes from having this. Uh,
Positive one?
well, no, from having this like wanting to go into the startup world or wanting to do my own thing, because I think that other people could go through the same experience that I had there and really enjoy it. But because my mind was always set on this, hey, create your own path, do your own thing,
Mhm.
that in my mind it was like a lesser alternative. But I could see myself going back to a firm like that someday down the road and taking what I've learned from being able to talk to people and understanding literally people from all over the world in different angles, and how could you apply that to a consulting setting or helping them have deeper connections with their employees, something like that.
Mhm.
So it's funny, I look at it as that time was rough, but I also still look back fondly on Deloitte as a company because I wouldn't be here today if I didn't start there.
Yeah, and that's why you have different experiences like that. It teaches you what you want, what you don't want, whether it's in a specific company or you're working for, or just in like, sounds like your manager at the time wasn't that great,
Mm.
and those things all contribute to where you want to go. And also, with when you said like you didn't feel that bad with leaving, I think you should. I mean, I guess everyone's story is different, but for the most part, if you're leaving on a decent note and you've put in your best, then like you should never feel bad. I think my like getting nervous about anything like that is kind of irrational, and it's something that in time I think you just get better at. But I respect that, and I think it's cool that you were able to look at it for what it was and just know that there was something better coming. I also want to touch on how you said that you started leaving at 5 o'clock. That is something that I feel like in business is a little bit looked down upon. What are your thoughts on that? And what was your experience with deciding to leave at 5 some days?
I think so. When the company was in its regular kind of operations, before they had laid off 20% of the company, before I had started the project, I would typically leave around like 6:30, and that was kind of normal for people at the office. And again, I came from, at Deloitte it was typically like 8 to 8, something like that. And so I came from that type of environment into where 8 to 6 was kind of a shorter day, and so I didn't mind that. I think what happened was that I realized that my project was going to be the thing that my future was. Like my project was going to be my future, not me being a sales rep at this company. So it's the same as when that um, my manager kept everyone in the office until 3 a.m. and I raised my hand and said, "Hey, I'm going to leave at 9." She was not happy. She said, "Okay, well then you call me at 10:30," because I was supposed to get dinner with my girlfriend and we had it planned. And she was like, "Okay, you can go get dinner, but you have to call me at 10:30 p.m. and I'll let you know if you have to come back to the office." And I said, "Okay, cool." Uh, but at that time, I didn't really care what that woman thought of me because I knew that I was going to leave Deloitte to go to this tech startup.
Mhm.
So if I didn't have that, I would have been in that office until 3 a.m. with everyone else. So fast forwarding to the startup, if I didn't have the project, or if I didn't wasn't going to get laid off, I wouldn't have been leaving at 5. But it just became clear to me that this is where I was going to go, and so it was a better use for me individually to put my time in. And Yeah, I think it was almost a leverage situation, if that makes sense, because as another example, the way that we were logging, I had mentioned that I kind of went back and was back to my responsibilities when I first started at the company, and like all that growth that I had over the year and a half was taken away from me. So I
This is at
started,
Deloitte?
no, this is at RJ Metrics, the startup. When they laid off
Okay.
20% of the company,
Oh, yeah.
went from 19 people to 5 people. When it was 19, I had kind of progressed up, but when it went back to 5, I had progressed down, if you will, or
Mhm.
degressed. And yes, one of my managers messaged me one day and she said, "Hey, are you logging your emails differently? Because it says that this week you've only sent out 20 emails so far, and your colleague Morgan has sent out 100 to like companies to prospect." And I said, "No, that's probably accurate. I'm just not sending out as many because I'm not interested in this role." And I said, at this point, because I had a review later that day, and I said, "I would love to talk to you and Ben, the director at the time, about how we can move me from a different position from where I am now to a different position within the company, or I want to talk about me transitioning out of the company to work on my project full time." And so I don't think she was expecting that response from me. I think she was expecting like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'll pick it up." But at that point, I felt confident in that the project was going to be my future. And so I had that leverage. And she ultimately was just like, "Okay, whatever, it's fine. Just do your thing." Because we were coming towards the end of our time there. We knew that the company might be bought out. And so I was taking those risks because I had that leverage of going into something different in my future. Uh, so I guess that's my take on it. I know that's a very complicated, long-winded answer to whether or not you should leave at 5 p.m. But for me, I was being more bold because I had these other pieces of the puzzle that existed other than just my job, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I and tell me if this isn't something you wanna answer, but I'm curious how like, do you monetize off of this project? Because that's really scary to leave your a job, assuming it's a salaried or whatever, just any type of income to pursue a project of your own.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. I have no problem pulling behind the curtain for people because I want them to know that how they could do these things in their own life. So when I first started, I had my savings from Deloitte and RJ Metrics, and I basically saw my life savings as my marketing budget to get this project off the ground. And we lived in a world at that time where maybe even more so than today, people with big followings on Instagram were able to get partnerships with brands and stuff. It was kind of like around peak travel influencer, I feel, when you would just see these people living these awesome lives, but they were getting paid to do it instead of them having to pay. And so I just saw that concept and I thought that what I was doing was interesting. And if people organically wanted to follow along with it and they authentically were interested in it, that eventually I could partner with brands whose values aligned with mine as well. So as early as November of 2016, yes, November of 2016, the company that laid me off, the two found, even though they laid me off, they're still friends of mine. And so
It's cool.
yeah, and it was just business. And so I messaged the one of them and I said, "Hey, I want you to sponsor me for a month with my project." And he said no. And then I said, "Well, how much did you think I was going to ask for?" I was like, "I just would love if I could have like $100. I'll put presented this month by Stitch Data, which was their new company. And I just want to see if it affects the authenticity of me sharing people's stories." So he gave me $100 and I put at the end of every caption, "presented this month by Stitch Data." And so my thought at that time was, okay, cool. I will have a new company each month sponsoring me, and I will just say "presented this month by XYZ company." And people will know that that is a company that's supporting human connection this month. So a lot like a goodwill type thing.
Mhm.
And in March of 2017, at the time I had like 7,000 followers on Instagram, maybe. One of the guys that I met with said that he loved what I was doing and that he wished he could support me. And so I told him I'm trying to do this monthly partnership thing. And it was March 10th. And I said, if you want to give me $200, I'll tag you in every post for the rest of this month, and I'll put presented this month by Fishtown Pharmacy. It was literally a mom and pop pharmacy in Fishtown, Philadelphia. And he said, I'll give you $300 and we'll call it a
Nice.
deal. So that kind of happened. And I was presented this month by Fishtown Pharmacy. And then this urgent care center, Vibe Urgent Care, was new to the city at the time. And their CEO reached out to me and said, hey, what's the deal with your partnerships? We're new in the city. We would love to do something with you. So then April, I was with Vibe Urgent Care. And then I went to the dentist for just a regular appointment. And my dentist, who is a guy that I met through my project, said, why didn't you ask me to sponsor you? I wanted to sponsor you. And so he became the next month's sponsor. And then it was a leadership program. And so I started to make money that way. But then in the summer of 2017, my lease in Philly was up. And at that point, I left Philly and I went out to LA to stay with my friend from Penn State. His name's TJ Bard. He was student body president when you were a freshman.
I don't know if I know him.
Okay, yeah, he's just from Penn State as well, and he's a really good friend. And so he was living in LA, and he had an extra bedroom in his apartment. So I went and stayed with him for that summer. And then my partnership things kind of got a little wonky because everything I was doing was in LA and everyone who followed me was in Philly. But I was able to do like a t-shirt sponsorship out there. And then I came back to Philly, kind of returned to that model. And then in 2018, I was back in LA for 9 months. And that summer I did a phone interview with Ryan Seacrest for his radio show. And I then took that audio and I sent it to WeWork, the co-working space. And I'm skipping over a few partnerships, but we did a partnership where I met people at their locations one day out of every month, or one day out of every week. And they paid me on a monthly basis to do that for 9 months. And that was June of last year up until the week before the pandemic started, or before everything shut down, like March 6th, it ended.
So June of 2019.
Yes, June 2019 to March 2020.
Got it.
Yes. And now I don't have that partnership anymore. And so you talk about that, like this was a really interesting time because a lot of people are losing their jobs, or people like their income streams are going away. And mine did as well. I've had 2 different partnerships since March. And the other time I've just been on my own, and I'm very lucky to have a support system where I can crash with family, but I haven't had income aside from that. And then I started running these webinars or seminars recently of teaching people how to talk about themselves and how to ask good questions of others. That has been bringing in income. And really what I'm pushing for now is public speaking, to start to share some of the lessons that I've learned with universities and corporations. And I think that's a place that I want to go in the future, because for me, it's like I'm trading my knowledge for value, as opposed to having to loop a brand into the concept of what I'm doing or something like that. Not to say I won't do brand partnerships, but I think public speaking will be my main focus. And I've met people who have been able to create really great careers out of leveraging projects they've done for speaking opportunities. So that's kind of the focus right now. It's an evolution. It looks so much different now how I think I'll support myself than it did back in July of 2016 when I first took it full time. But I think for anyone who's wanting to do their own thing, it's like you're never going to have all the answers when you start. Like if you're not willing to find the answer 4 years from now, then you might not be cut out for that path to go down entrepreneurship and like walk in the darkness for a bit.
Yeah, and I also feel like I was just listening to Tim Ferriss's podcast, and he interviewed or had a conversation with one of his really good friends. Forget what his title is. He's not the CEO. He's like COO, I think, of Shopify.
Oh,
And
okay.
just listening to them talk, and it just reminds me of like that might be you in 10 years talking about your original project. I think there's something really interesting about entrepreneurs and just going for it. So how have you marketed your project and then now your webinars to grow And forgetting how many followers you have on Instagram now, but to grow your following and also to just get your webinar out there and such. Any key things that you've learned that have been most successful?
In general, my strategy has always just been to do the project because naturally, by meeting people, people tell people about it, or since the early days, people would before Instagram stories existed, they would repost the photo to their page and say, "Hey, I met this guy Rob. He's doing this project. Reach out to him if you want to be part of it." Now a lot of people repost it to their Instagram stories. So it grows that way because people just talk about it after they're part of it or even before they're part of it. And yeah, everything I guess organically has just been the main way. Like I've been very fortunate I did the Today Show over this past summer. Last summer or last December, I was a guest on Kelly Clarkson's national talk show. Now this did a piece on me that came out the same week. Before that, I had done CBS, New York, ABC, World News Now, which is national, and then I did the Ryan Seacrest thing, and it just so Ryan Seacrest happened because I met a girl. She reposted our photo. Her friend was a producer for the show and thought it was an interesting idea, so she emailed me the next day. So it just came from a girl that I met through my project.
That's cool.
Kelly Clarkson happened because of a bunch of Philly pieces that I had done. Really, the main one was NBC. Was it NBC? I or CBS? I can't remember which one in Philly did a piece on me because they had been following my project for years because of another reporter that they had seen do a piece on it. And so when they put that out, the Kelly Clarkson show was just starting at the time, and their producers were looking for stories that fit this good neighbor feel. They came across that piece, they DM'd me on Instagram, and then flew me out the next month. Um, the New York Post, Now This, ABC, World News Now, all came from one girl that I met in Hoboken who had followed my project because I met a friend of hers 3 years earlier. And without me asking, she just thought it was interesting and she sent it to her contacts in the media because she had worked in the space. So they all did stories on it. And all of that is what has led to the growth of the project. And recently, though, TikTok has been my biggest growth factor, which is crazy. I put out a video there in September, and it was just like, "Hey, do you want to meet me? I've been doing this project for the last 5 years, blah, blah, blah. DM me on Instagram if you want to be a part of it." And I think it was viewed at this point like 180,000 times, but I had probably over 1,000 messages come into my Instagram from that video alone. And so this past Saturday, I was talking to my brother and I said, "Hey, I'm just going to do another video like that, very similar." And so I changed it. And I was just like, "Hey, I want to meet you. I've been doing this for the last 5 years, blah, blah, blah." And I put that out just for like a measurement's sake. I was at 39.7 thousand followers when I put that out Saturday afternoon. And now I'm at like 42.9. And so in 2 days or whatever, it just kind of grew. And a lot of those people have messaged me on Instagram. And so if I were to show you through my message requests right now, it's just like every minute they're still coming in just because of that video. So TikTok oddly has been the biggest thing recently. And I plan to continue doing stuff there because that audience is so engaged. And I think the algorithm just pushes it to the right people who find the concept of what I'm doing to be interesting.
Wow. And then when you get all of these messages coming to your inbox, this kind of goes back to what we originally kind of started talking about. Do you try to get back to everyone? Do you have any sort of like criteria for who you talk to? Or are you like, okay, I've got 5,000 messages. I'll try to get back to everyone. It just depends on my schedule. How does it work?
It, in the old days, I would try to get back to everyone because I guess for your listeners, the first 3,259 people that I met were all in person. I never intended to do video calls, but then with the pandemic, I took things virtual. So pretty much everyone since then has been virtual. So I used to tell people, "Hey, I'd love to meet if I'm ever in your area." But now that doesn't exist anymore. And so I can meet anyone, but it would just be, I don't have the time in the day to get back to every message now. And if I did, then my in my mind, it's like, okay, the message requests is like the holding area for people that I'm going to meet. The people that I'm actively in conversation with, setting up times, are the people that are in my active messages.
Hmm.
So I don't answer people until I'm ready to meet them within the next week or two. So a lot of people will, and that's how sometimes it gets lost. Like when you messaged me, I probably had a bunch of other messages. And then if you don't get back to it in 4 weeks, it disappears from your all message requests.
Mm.
And you can still find it if you go to your top message requests and just like scroll and scroll. Um, but mine is kind of broken right now. None of my top message requests come up. So all I have to work with is the all message requests area. But yeah, I will look through them. And for example, there was let me see here, a girl who messaged me yesterday and she said, "I'm Astrid from Mauritius." Do you know where that is?
I don't think so.
It's a small like island country east of Madagascar, like East Africa. I
Cool.
I didn't know it was a country before she messaged me, and so I messaged her back, and I was like, I have never met someone from that country, nor did I even know it existed. So yes, I would love to meet, and I would love to hear about it and stuff. So every once in a while, something that like that will catch my eye, but for the most part, I just try to make sure that it's diversified of who I'm talking to. So I don't
Hmm.
really look at followers or like how interesting someone is or anything like that, but I try to make sure that I have representation from all different races, all different countries, things like that, because I want people to feel like they're seeing people like them in my project, and so that they feel permission to reach out and be part of it as well. And that goes for like all different things like religious backgrounds, gender, age. I just want it to be as diversified as possible because I also want to learn from a diverse group of people. So that's the
Hell
main
yeah.
thing I think about.
That's awesome. I respect that and I like that a lot. And is there a theme, a common theme that you've learned? You know, these, like you just said, you're talking to people from all different backgrounds. Is there anything that kind of is like everyone feels X, or I don't know, something like that?
I always say that the biggest thing I've learned from my project is that no one really knows what they're doing with their lives. Everyone is just doing the best they can with the resources that they have. And I think that that has resonated with every single person that I've talked to because people are in school, they're like, yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do after school or what I want to do with my life. Or people who are in their early 30s and are new parents, they're like, yeah, I don't know how to be a mother or a father. I'm having my first child and I don't know what to expect. uh, I've just realized how amateur everyone is when it comes to reaching that next level of life, and that has given me a lot of comfort because I think in general people will compare themselves to other people and say everyone but me has their life together, like that person's so happy in their job or their relationship, why can't I be like that? Or that person knows what they want to do with their life, I don't have anything like that in my life. When in reality, no one knows what they're doing. Everyone is just in that situation of trying to make it through the human experience. And for me, I've gotten to see that through people's insecurities and uncertainties and the hardships that they've had to be go through in their families, things that don't make it to Instagram. So that has been a really cool learning lesson for me.
And also probably makes everyone feel like y- they're not alone,
Yeah,
which is,
I wish more people knew that.
yeah, which is a really important thing. In your conversations, you don't have any specific direction or agenda or anything, right? They are truly just, hi, let's talk for an hour, wherever it goes, cool. And, then chat later, right?
Yeah, and there is no structure. I am genuinely curious in what a person's path is, so I will ask questions around that, like where they came from, where they are now, where they want to go in the future. And I kind of fill out that story in my mind through the questions that I ask. But I spoke to one dude about scuba diving for 45 minutes. It's just the conversation goes where it goes. And sometimes I spoke to a girl who she wanted to meet, not really to talk about herself, because her younger brother had been hit and killed by a drunk driver the year before. and she was like, I want to use this as an opportunity to keep his memory alive. And
That's
we
cool.
just like spoke and cried for the hour together at a cafe in
Oh,
Los Angeles. Um, but that was a really cool thing to sit and share that time with her. So yeah, there's no structure, and I think that puts people at ease too, because a lot of people, same thing that you mentioned earlier, people will be like, oh, you interviewed my friend, or you should interview this person. And I'm like, I don't want to interview anyone. There's no interviewing going on here. I want to sit and have a conversation with you like a regular person. And I think when they understand that, they're like, oh, okay, I don't have to put on, I can just be myself, and we can just relax and have a good time.
yeah, which is such a good feeling. And I always like to end these on a positive note. So, any quote or belief or anything that you kind of live by day to day.
You mentioned having a quote, and I think when I was doing my project, the times that I looked like I was running out of money and that it wasn't going to work, I drew inspiration from Kid Cudi's song Up, Up and Away, because
Mm,
at the end, it's not even part of the song, it's just like a speaking part at the end. They say, the end is never the end. And that became a really important quote for me on my project, because I saw running completely out of money to be the end of my project, but the end wasn't the end. It was just, now I say, a more inconvenient path forward than I would have anticipated. But it played an important role in the project because I freed myself from that fear of running out of money, and I allowed myself to continue doing what I was doing. And because I did that, I was able to land a partnership worth thousands of dollars that allowed me to continue doing my project through the end of the year. But I had to sit down and think about it. Like, if I ran out of money, I could go back into a part-time job or a full-time job. I could leverage my network to find something. I could put out a request for like donations for the project. And so it just opened up these different paths forward. Um, and I think that's an important thing for people to realize. I think fear kicks in a lot earlier than when we're actually in trouble.
mm.
So if you can allow yourself to kind of push past that for a bit, things tend to right themselves and correct themselves, or you become more inspired to work on what you're working on in different capacities. So that is my positive note. It just kept me going, and here I am still doing the project. That time that I really needed that was back in 2018, so a while ago.
Yes, and never panic. What you just said is so true. And then just plug yourself, tell us where to follow you and everything.
Cool. If people are interested in following the project or being part of it, I am at Robs10kFriends on Instagram. That's where I document the stories of everyone that I meet. That's where I do most of my communication with people. And then if they want some of the behind the scenes look at the project, they can head over to TikTok, where I'm at Robs10kFriends. I post advice there and kind of like backstory of my own story. Uh, and then I'm Robs10kFriends.com for a couple of blog posts. They haven't been updated in a while, but just another place for people to check me out. But the main thing is at Robs10kFriends on Instagram.
This is great. Thank you so much for sharing so much about your story and what you're working on. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for reaching out and being patient with me and having me on. And yeah,
Yeah.
definitely down to have you be part of the project sometime.
Yeah, totally. I'm definitely down. But yeah, this is really cool. I think it's awesome what you're doing. And it feels so good to just connect with people. And also just everything else you were talking about with like kind of following, what felt right for you and stuff. I respect it and I think it's real cool. So props to you. Cheers to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on. I'm looking forward to getting to know more about you sometime and hearing like your backstory and how you got into the podcast and everything. But
Yeah,
we'll save it
totally.
for another day.